Okay, so we should be live on both YouTube and TikTok. I'm going to just double check and make sure. Okay. Make sure everything looks good here. Everything seems to be running good here. Okay, we're gonna check over on YouTube now. Okay. Okay. Let's go to your videos. Over here, we'll just check on this then. Okay. And again, I am just making sure everything is running fine. Hopefully my computer can handle this thing. Okay. This is running fine. So we will exit out of that. Okay. And I will go ahead and get started. This is now formally the Daily Sit Down. Now, Dude reads the news because that's more apt to what's happening. We're gonna go ahead and jump right into it. We're starting on BBC like we typically do. So just now, actually, we have an update. Qatar closes airspace as UK and US tell citizens to shelter in place. Okay. Qatar has temporarily closed its airspace after the US and UK told their citizens in the country to shelter in place until further notice. The US Embassy in Qatar suggested a notice online that Americans do so out of an abundance of caution. The UK government said it was issuing its warning in response to the US alert. The warnings come after the State Department told US citizens in international locations to exercise increased 3 nuclear sites in Iran on Saturday. Iran has threatened to retaliate. In a statement, Qatar Ministry of Foreign Affairs said the closure of its airspace was to ensure the safety of its residents and visitors. Where's the chat for this? Anyway, okay. The U.S. Embassy in Qatar suggested in a notice online that Americans do so, and the warnings come after the State Department told U.S. citizens in international locations to exercise increased caution after the U.S. bombed 3 nuclear sites in Iran on Saturday. Iran has threatened to retaliate. In a statement, Qatar's Ministry of Foreign Affairs said the closure of its airspace was to ensure the safety and of residents and visitors. In a separate statement in response to the embassy's notice, give me one moment, guys. Okay. This way I can see the YouTube chat as well. Okay. In a separate statement in response to the embassy notice, the foreign ministry said the warnings did not necessarily reflect the existence of special threats. The security situation in the country is stable, the statement said, adding that the relevant authorities are closely monitoring the situation and are ready to take all necessary measures to ensure the safety of citizens, residents, and visitors. Qatar is home to the largest U.S. military base in the Middle East, Al Udeid Air Base. About 8,000 U.S. citizens live there, according to the State Department. The U.S. has about 40,000 troops stationed in the Middle East. Flight tracking websites show planes diverting to other airports following the closures of Qatari airspace, according to Flight Trader 24. There are 100 flights bound for Doha Hamad International Airport as a major transit hub in the Middle East. The message from the U.S. Embassy was allowed by warnings from other groups in Qatar, including several universities that ask students to go home. Bilateral relations between U.S. and Qatar are strong, according to the State Department, which says Qatar has helped play a financial, political, military role in dealing with turmoil in the region. Okay, so that's all they've got on that so far. We are on the BBC, by the way. Okay, what is the Strait of Hormuz and why does it matter? Okay, So there is considerable speculation that Iran might retaliate for the U.S. strikes on its nuclear facilities by closing the world's busiest oil shipping channel, the Strait of Hormuz. About 20% of global oil and gas flows through this narrow shipping lane in the Gulf. Blocking it would have profound consequences for the global economy, disrupting international trade and ratcheting up oil prices. It could also inflate the cost of goods and services worldwide and hit some of the world's biggest economies, including China, India, and Japan, which are among the top importers of crude oil passing through the strait. Okay, well, what is the Strait of Hormuz and where is it? The Strait of Hormuz is one of the world's most important shipping routes. It is the most vital oil transit choke point, bounded to the north by Iran and the south by Oman and the United Arab Emirates (UAE). The corridor, which is only about 50 kilometers (31 miles) wide at its entrance and exit, about 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest point, connects the Gulf with the Arabian Sea. So, if I remember correctly, right, there was a theory that Israel wanted this territory over here because they wanted to destroy this and like build a channel like how we did in Panama, so we could like I can't remember exactly like what their reasoning was, but they want people to trade through the Red Sea as opposed to like over here. But over here doesn't even connect. I can't remember what the actual theory was, but Strait of Hormuz, key route for global oil transport. Okay, the strait is deep enough for the world's biggest crude oil tankers and is used by the major oil and gas producers in the Middle East and their customers. In the first half of 2023, around 20 million barrels of oil went through the Strait of Hormuz per day, according to the estimates from the U.S. Energy Information Administration, EIA. That's nearly $600 billion worth of energy trade per year. That oil comes not only from Iran, but also other Gulf states such as Iraq, Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. What would be the impact of closing the strait? Former head of the UK's intelligence agency MI6, Sir Alex Younger, told the BBC his worst-case scenario on the ongoing Iran-Israel conflict included a blockade on the Hormuz Strait. Closing the strait would be obviously an incredible economic problem given the effect it would have on the oil price, he said. It would be uncharted terrain, according to Bader al-Saif, an assistant professor at Kuwait University who specializes in geopolitics of the Arabian Peninsula. Okay. It would have direct consequences on world markets because you're going to look at an uptick in the oil price, and you're going to see the stock markets reacting very nervously to what's happening, Mr. Saif told BBC Newshore. It would, of course, hurt the Gulf countries whose economies rely heavily on energy exports. Saudi Arabia, for instance, uses the strait to export around 6 million barrels of crude oil per day, more than any neighboring country, according to research by analytics from Vortexa. Okay? Iran, by comparison, exports about 1.7 million barrels per day, according to the International Energy Agency. Iran exported $67 billion worth of oil in the financial year ending March 2025, its highest oil revenue in the past decade, according to estimates by the Central Bank of Iran. Asia too would be hit hard. In 2022, around 82% of crude oil and condensates, low-density liquids, hydrocarbons that typically occur with the natural gas, leaving the Strait of Hormuz, were bound for Asian countries, according to EIA estimates. China alone is estimated to buy around 90% of the oil that Iran exports for the global market. Any disruptions to that could increase fuel and production costs at a time when China is having to rely on manufacturing and exports. That's not just a domestic problem either. Rising manufacturing costs could eventually be passed on to consumers, fueling inflation around the world. The impact could also be outsized for other key Asian economies, which are among the biggest importers after China. Nearly half India's crude oil and 60% of its natural gas imports pass through the Strait of Hormuz. South Korea reportedly gets 60% of its crude oil through the Strait of Japan, nearly 3/4. How could Iran close the strait? United Nations rules allow countries to exercise control up to 12 nautical miles, 13.8 miles from their coastline. This means that at its narrowest point, the Strait of Hormuz its shipping lanes lie entirely with Iran and Oman's territorial waters. If Iran were to try and block the 3,000 or so ships that sail through the strait each month, one of the most effective ways to do so, according to experts, would be to lay mines using fast attack boats and submarines. Thank you guys for joining. I'm just reading BBC right now. They're talking about what it means if Iran were to close the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's regular navy and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps navy could potentially launch attacks on foreign warships and commercial vessels. However, large military ships may in turn become easy targets for U.S. airstrikes. Iran's fast boats are often armed with anti ship missiles, and the country also operates a range of surface vessels, semi submersible crafts, and submarines. Experts say Iran could block the strait temporarily, but many are equally confident that the U.S. and its allies could swiftly reestablish the flow of maritime traffic through military means. The U.S. has done this before. In the late 1980s, during the 8-year Iran-Iraq War, strikes on oil facilities escalated into a tanker war that saw both countries attacking neutral ships to exert economic pressure. Kuwaiti tankers carrying Iraqi oil were especially vulnerable, and eventually American warships began escorting them through the Gulf in what became the biggest naval convoy operation since World War II. Okay, will Iran block the strait? Iran's parliament has approved a motion to close the Strait of Hormuz, state-linked media reported. A final decision lies with the Supreme National Security Council, the country's most senior national security body, which operates under the auspices of the supreme leader. While Iran has repeatedly threatened to close the waterway in past conflicts, it has never followed through. Perhaps the closest call was during a tanker war of the late 1980s, but even then, shipping through the Strait of Hormuz was never seriously disrupted. If Iran delivers on its threat, this time could be different. The Secretary of State Marco Rubio has claimed that Iran's closure of the Strait of Hormuz would amount to economic suicide and called on China, an ally of Tehran, to intervene. I encourage the Chinese government in Beijing to call them about that, because them being Iran, because they heavily depend on the Strait of Hormuz for their oil, Rubio said in an interview with Fox News on Sunday. We retain options to deal with that, but other countries should be looking at that as well. It would hurt other countries' economies a lot worse than ours. Though China is yet to respond, Beijing is highly unlikely to welcome any rise in oil prices or disruptions to shipping routes, and could leverage its diplomatic weight to dissuade the Iranian government from going ahead with the blockade. Energy analyst Vandana Hari said Iran has little to gain and too much to lose from closing the strait. Iran risks turning its oil and gas producing neighbors into the Gulf into enemies and invoking the ire of its key market, China, by disrupting traffic in the strait, Hari told BBC News. Can alternative routes offset a blockade? The persistent threat of a closure of the Strait of Hormuz has over the years prompted oil exporting countries in the Gulf region to develop alternative exporting routes. According to an EIA report, Saudi Arabia has activated its East-West pipeline, a 1,200-kilometer long line capable of transporting up to 5 million barrels of crude oil per day. In 2019, Saudi Arabia temporarily repurposed a natural gas pipeline to carry crude oil. The United Arab Emirates has connected its inland oil fields to the port of Fujairah. I can't pronounce that. Fujairah on the Gulf of Oman via a pipeline with a daily capacity of 1.5 million barrels. In July 2021, Iran inaugurated the Gorish-Jashk pipeline intended to move crude oil to the Gulf of Oman. This pipeline can currently carry around 350,000 barrels per day, although reports suggest Iran does not yet. The EIA estimates that these alternative routes could collectively handle around 3.5 million barrels of oil per day, roughly 15% of the crude currently shipped through the strait. Okay. So that's the end of that article. Basically, this is the BBC, so they're gonna want to make it seem like it's not as a big deal as it can be. So if we go over to Al Jazeera, we can check to see what maybe they're talking about. Let's see here. Can Iran really shut down the Strait of Hormuz? This is now being from Al Jazeera. So Iran can decide to close the vital maritime trade route through which 1/5 of the world's oil supply is shipped every day. Okay, amid Israel's ongoing attacks in Gaza and Iran, U.S. President Donald Trump's unprecedented decision to bomb 3 Iranian nuclear sites has deepened fears of regional conflict in the Middle East. Over the weekend, the United States military carried out its first known strikes against Iran since the 1979 Islamic Revolution toppled pro-Western Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. Tehran has vowed to respond, prompting fears of escalation. During an address to a meeting of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, OIC, in Istanbul, Turkey, on Sunday, Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said the U.S. crossed a very big red line by attacking Iran's nuclear facilities. One way Iran could retaliate is to shut the Strait of Hormuz, a vital trade route where 1/5 of the world's oil supply, roughly 20 million barrels, and much of its liquid fuel gas is shipped each day. That would lead to a surge in energy prices. So, what do we know about the strategic passage, and can Iran afford to block it in response to the U.S. and Israeli aggression? Okay. Strait of Hormuz. Okay. They got a little map here of it, so that way you can see it. This is, again, on aljazeera.com, so if you want to see the map that I'm talking about, you can go there. And then the name of the article is, Can Iran Really Shut Down the Strait of Hormuz, right? So what is the Strait of Hormuz? The Strait of Hormuz lies between Oman and the United Arab Emirates on one side and Iran on the other. It links the Persian Gulf with the Gulf of Oman and the Arabian Sea beyond. It is 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest point, with the shipping lane just 3 kilometers wide in either direction, making it vulnerable to attack. Energy traders have been on high alert since Israel launched a wave of surprise attacks across Iran on June 13th, fearing disruptions to oil and gas flows through the strait. While the U.S. and Israel have targeted key parts of Iran's energy infrastructure, there has been no direct disruption to maritime activity in the region thus far. Still, even before the U.S. strikes on Saturday, the escalation of the conflict between Israel and Iran had sparked ocean freight rates to surge in recent weeks. Freight intelligence from Zanetta said average spot rates have increased 55% month over month through to last Friday. Who would need to approve the closure? Iran has, in the past, threatened to close the Strait of Hormuz, but has never followed through on the threat. Iran's Supreme National Security Council must make the final decision to close the strait, Iran's press TV said on Sunday, after parliament was reported to have backed the measure. However, the decision to close the strait is not yet final, as Parliament has not ratified a bill to that effect. Instead, a member of Parliament National Security Commission, Ismaili Khorsari, was quoted in Iranian media as saying, "For now, Parliament has come to the conclusion we should close the Strait of Hormuz, but the final decision in this regard is the responsibility of the Supreme National Security Council." Asked about whether Tehran would close the waterway, FM Araghchi dodged the question on Sunday and replied, "A variety of options are available to Iran." In his first comments since the U.S. strikes, Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei said that Israel has made a grave mistake and must be punished, but did not make any specific reference to either Washington or the Strait of Hormuz. How would the closure work in practice? Iran could attempt to lay mines across the Strait of Hormuz. The country's army or the paramilitary Islamic Revolutionary Guard, the IRGC, may also try to strike or seize vessels in the Gulf, a method they have used on several occasions in the past. During the 1980s Iran-Iraq War, the two sides engaged in the so-called tanker wars in the Persian Gulf. Iraq targeted Iranian ships and Iran attacked commercial ships, including Saudi and Kuwaiti oil tankers and even U.S. Navy ships. Tensions in the strait flared up again at the end of 2007 in a series of skirmishes between the Iranian and the U.S. navies. This included one incident where an Iranian speedboat approached U.S. warships though no shots were fired. In April 2023, Iranian troops seized the Advantage Sweet crude tanker, which was chartered by Chevron in the Gulf of Oman. The vessel was released more than a year later. So they held the ship for a year. That's crazy. What would it mean for the global economy? U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio on Sunday called on China to encourage Iran to not shut down the Strait of Hormuz after Washington carried out strikes on Iranian nuclear sites. Speaking to Fox News, Rubio said it's economic suicide for them if they do it, close the strait. And we retain options to deal with that, but other countries should be looking at that as well. It would hurt other countries' economies a lot worse than ours. For starters, shutting Hormuz risks bringing Gulf Arab states, which have been highly critical of the Israeli attack, into the war to safeguard their own commercial interests. Closing the strait would also hit China. The world's second largest economy buys almost 90% of Iran's oil exports, roughly 1.6 million barrels per day, which are subject to the international sanctions. So now I'm starting to see kind of a line here, right? This is not... Iran is unfortunately the target and who's being attacked right now, but I'm kind of thinking now at this point that we're trying to affect China. I think we want them to close the Strait of Hormuz. Like, if they're giving that much oil to China, and like we just had that big thing where it's like, oh, we want TikTok down because of China and all that kind of stuff. I'm thinking it's a trade war tactic to hit China on top of the tariffs, right? And then Iran is just unfortunately the one who's getting the brunt end of it, and they're using the nuclear enrichment program as like the veil to like go in and do this. But anyways, we'll keep reading. According to Goldman Sachs, a blockade of the Strait of Hormuz could push oil prices above 100 per barrel. That would push the cost of production up, eventually affecting consumer prices, especially for energy-intensive goods like food, clothing, and chemicals. Oil importing countries around the world could experience higher inflation and slower economic growth for the conflict if the conflict persists, which could prompt central banks to push back the timing of future rate cuts. But history has shown that severe disruptions to global oil supplies have tended to be short-lived. Before the start of the Second Gulf War between March and May 2003, crude oil surged by a whooping 46% at the end of 2002, but prices quickly unwound in the days preceding the start of the U.S.-led military campaign. Similarly, the Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022 sparked a sharp rally in oil prices to $130 a barrel, but prices returned to their pre-invasion levels of $95 by mid-August. These relatively quick reversals of oil prices spikes were largely due to global spare production capacity available at the time, and the fact that the rapid oil price increased curb demand. So, Al Jazeera and BBC are both basically saying that it would be bad for the global economy for the strait to close. We are now going to go over to PBS, and we're going to see what they're speaking on. Okay, so they've got what we know about the U.S. unprecedented attack on Iran. Okay. Let's actually take a look at Kennedy and Medicare and Medicaid head Dr. Oz makes health insurance announcement. So, a group of Democratic House members demanded Trump administration officials on Monday to stop sharing data of medical enrollees, including their immigration status, with Deputy of Homeland Security. So they're sharing their information, their insurance information with people. That's That's wild. If you guys have been saying hi or anything like that, I apologize. Because this stuff is also being posted onto YouTube, so I am reading directly to be able to just make sure I can post it on YouTube as well. So thank you guys for watching live. I really appreciate it. We'll continue. So the request came in later, sent by 8 lawmakers to Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. The letter was sent in response to an Associated Press report this month that detailed how deportation officials had obtained the sensitive data over the objection of career health officials. The data could assist federal agents in finding migrants. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Representative Andrea Espaillat, chair of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, were among those who signed the letter. It follows a letter sent last week by Democratic senators to Kennedy and other Trump appointees. So basically, insurance companies weren't evil enough already. They're now turning over information to Homeland Security for them to pick up migrants and immigrants and stuff like that. This is it's right. There's no trying to come up to it with a solution in regards to these people, because it's like they don't care, and it's they want you to just continue to talk about it, right? Like, and it's not a bad thing to just talk about it, but that's what they want from you. It's just to keep talking about it and not do anything about it, and that's Israel hits Evin prison, showing it's targeting Iran's ruling system. This is now on Reuters. Israel struck the most notorious jail for political prisoners in Tehran on Monday, in a potential demonstration that it was expanding its targets beyond military and nuclear sites to aim squarely at the pillars of Iran's ruling system. Iran repeated earlier threats to retaliate against the U.S., but has yet to do so in a meaningful way, more than 24 hours after U.S. bombers dropped 30,000-pound bunker busters on Iran's underground nuclear sites, while President Donald Trump openly mused about overthrowing the Iranian government. Jesus, man. 2 U.S. officials said Washington assessed that Iran could carry out attacks targeting American forces in the Middle East soon, although the U.S. is still seeking a diplomatic resolution that would see Tehran forego any reprisal. In Qatar, home to the biggest U.S. military base in the Middle East, the U.S. Embassy advised Americans to shelter in place. Out of what it said was an abundance of caution. Oh, I don't know why I had a hard time reading that. I had a brain fart. Despite Iran's threats to challenge oil shipments from the Gulf, prices largely held steady, suggesting traders doubted the Islamic Republic would follow through on any action that would disrupt global supplies. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi met Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow as Tehran sought backing from one of its last major power friends for its next steps. Viva la Libertad. Israel made very clear that its strike on Evin prison and other targets in Tehran were intended to hit the Iranian ruling apparatus broadly and its ability to sustain power. Viva la Libertad, Foreign Minister Gideon Saar wrote on X, accompanying a video of an explosion at buildings with a sign identifying it as entrance to Evin prison. Reuters could not immediately verify the video posted by Saar, although other videos show the aftermath of the strike on the prison were verified as genuine. Iran's Arab state broadcaster released videos showcasing rescue workers combing the flattened wreckage of a building at the prison, carrying a wounded man on a stretcher. The Mizan news outlet of Iran's judiciary said urgent action was being taken to protect the health safety of inmates there. So just more bombing between Israel and Iran. Well, we are wrapping it up here at 30 minutes. I usually go till 10, but I had to start early because there's some stuff I need to get done today. But yeah, we try to stay as up to date as possible. I have all of the major news networks that I go to here, and we just go through and see who's talking about what. We read BBC today, PBS, Al Jazeera, and we ended on Reuters. But that's going to be the end of Dude Reads the News for today. We were formerly the Daily Sit Down, but I decided Dude Reads the News is a far better description of what's going on in this show. I appreciate anybody who stayed and watched, and I hope you guys have a safe and wonderful day. Thank you so much.